start the webinar. I'm going to turn off my video. And once we get a group in, okay, so as our attendees join the session, just a reminder of the ground rules for everyone. So we will only have 2 papers in this session. We're going to abide by the 10-minute time limit, although because there's only 2 papers, I'm not going to be like really strict with it. We will save all questions for the end. Those of you in attendance, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and I will relay those to our panelists at the end. I think that's everything from me. So, and you already have your paper ready to go, so I will turn the floor over to you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tanni Choudhury. I've been working as a senior research fellow at Jindal Institute of Behavioral Sciences, OP Jindal Global University, India. Today, along with my colleague, Mr. Vipin Vijay Nair, we are going to talk to you about our paper, which is on impact of victimization through benevolent sexism in young adults in India. Most of us, by now, we must have heard comments or statements such as women are naturally kind, caring, or compassionate. Despite being a good mother, she's also a good employee, or she's not just a pretty face. For men, we must have also heard comments or statements like he's a good father despite being a good employee. He's a natural, men are natural protectors, and wow, he can cook or clean. So the whole need for such a study came about through a small seminar that we had at our campus at the university in India. And we realized that even now, after so many decades of such progressiveness and liberal rules in India, most of us are still not aware of the other part of sexism, which is benevolent sexism. The one that looks like a compliment, feels like a compliment, but still it can be very hurtful and sexist in nature, and that can lead to many gender inequality and lots of policy efforts which may hamper the gender equality in India. So through our study, let me give you a brief on why we think there was a need to build a study around benevolent sexism and its impact on victimization, especially on young adults, because we have realized that as early as 4 to 5 years of age, children, they reveal gender stereotypical preferences. So very early in life, boys and girls, they are taught how to behave. They are taught what activities to like or do, and what toys or clothing are preferred. So such sexist attitudes and beliefs, they combine and influence our future life trajectories by often subtly influencing our beliefs, feelings, and behaviors. So such gender-specific behaviors and roles, they hinder young people's ability to discern the variety of emotions, social and educational capacities and options that can be envisioned. So eventually, such gender stereotypical beliefs and behaviors, they undermine policy efforts that drive for gender equality. So in our study, we mapped the existence of benevolent sexism in young adults in India. First, we wanted to understand if people were, especially young adults, were they aware of the other form of sexism, which is benevolent sexism, because most of us are always aware of the hostile sexism, the most explicitly negative attitudes towards women. We are all aware of that, but the benevolent sexism often gets undermined in our understanding. So, in the second part of our study, we wanted to understand how we have wanted to depict the impact of victimization through benevolent sexism in young adults in India. So, in our methodology, we wanted the questions that we developed were based on a review of literature. And there were 26 statements, other than the very specific and general socio-demographic questions that we put to our participants. So, those questions were developed by both of us based on our review of literature. And it was very culture specific, keeping in mind the country that we are coming from, the cultures that we both belong to. So we kept those questions specific to that. We did not follow any scale or any scale that was available on this on benevolent sexism or victimization. And it was conducted with young adults who were in the 18 to 35 years age group, and the research involved descriptive statistics to analyze the data. Since my background is psychology and I have been studying psychology for for so many years, we the first part of our study we also wanted to understand how such gender specific stereotypical beliefs and roles impact later in life, for example in young adults. And mostly our population, the participants that we conducted, they were from higher education institutions. They all had good educational background, and still in our findings, which my colleague will be talking about on the second half of the session on our presentation, is that we are still not aware. And in the first step, the most important part is to be aware and recognize the how unconsciously sexism builds up in our language, in our decision making, and how it hinders our potential and capacity in further future life trajectories. So over to you, Vipin, for the second part of the session.
Thank you very much, Tanni. So, as my colleague mentioned, that we looked on to both the psychological aspect based on certain statements which led to benevolent sexism, and one of the response that we also looked was the victimization. So, I will highlight certain findings that we have received from more than 120 individual responses across India and from respondents who were from the age group of 18 to 35. So we had a wide social demographic to cover here. There were questions which focused on will there be certain kind of stereotypes which would be against women? Will there be a stereotype in terms of career, in terms of how they are looking after their household? Will they be sacrificing their work? So the respondents were asked, have they experienced such kind of stereotypical statement near them? Have they seen individuals who have been abused, harmed, or victimized based on these responses? So these are very few statements that I have covered. There are close to around 26 responses that we could depict graphically. So I'll just go through a few of them in order to make you understand, and then we'll discuss upon what has been the findings and results of the entire study. So if you'll see, one of the question did ask them, do you see that a good woman should be put on pedestal? Is this a sexist remark? So there were students, there were individuals, there were young adults who felt that yes, this is sexist, and they have seen individuals using these kind of statement behaving in this particular way. Then they have also seen, in terms of victimization, women being denied. So specifically, if you focus on female as a gender, they have seen that they have also been denied if they go against the norms set by the society, if they behave in a different manner, if they behave in a bad or in a set manner which is being set by either office or a professional space or a personal space. So even at that point, there has been more than 80 responses. So these are number of responses, not percentage wise. How have been the response which has come from the respondent in the survey? Then women than men spend more time on household activity regardless of their employee status. So this reflects how women are being perceived in the society and how a household perceive women in terms of what are their roles and responsibility. And on the similar perspective, if they are not looking after their household, there is abuse and victimization that has been led towards them. And more than 100, which is close to around 90% of the individual, have seen that if women are not pursuing household, they are not dedicating themselves towards household work, they are being abused, may it be verbal abuse or may it be physical abuse. Then last part that which I want to highlight is in terms of how women are uh, believed that they have to be warm, compassionate, they have to contribute towards family, and they have to keep their personal life above their professional life. So these were few of the responses that we have received, and there were more than again 100 responses which believe that women are expected to contribute towards their family rather than their career choices, how they want to perceive their professional life. So all of these in terms of findings, the discussion that we would want to highlight upon, or the conclusion that we want to derive upon, is that at least 3 out of 4, which means 75% of the respondent have at least experienced benevolent sexism around them, which means that subconsciously either they or people around them have been experiencing or practicing benevolent sexism, which indeed are causing victimization. May it be physical victimization, there can be physical abuses. We have seen that domestic violence have been on a rising front. One of the cause could be that individuals are not expecting that they are working onto hostile sexism, but there is benevolent sexism which is going on. So this is one thing that we always focus on, hostile sexism, that okay, if you only beat a person, if you only abuse a person, that's something which is wrong. But there can also be a root cause that benevolent sexism at one or the other point can turn onto hostile sexism. Then uh, through our study, through the survey and the question that we have found, we have seen that women have suffered psychologically over a longer period of time from benevolent sexism than hostile sexism. It doesn't say it. I would not want to say that they did not go through hostile sexism, but over the long period of time, psychologically, benevolent sexism affect them more. Maybe hostile sexism affect them physically, but when you talk about psychological perspective, through benevolent sexism, it has affected them more. And with our survey, with our research paper, we can also conclude that there is a concurrent relationship between benevolent sexism and victimization. If there is a persistent benevolent sexism present in an individual, it will surely at one or the other point reflect into an abuse or victimization. So there are a few recommendations that based on a study we would want to suggest, we want to focus on, not just about certain policy recommendation, but it could also be in terms of certain awareness. We would also want to reflect that one need to understand certain attitudes, certain behavior, so that we will be able to come out with a gender parity, and there will not be any kind of stereotypes which will come in. There will not be any kind of focus which will be there only on a particular gender. And being in India, where we have complex gender ratio, certain states which has very low gender ratio, certain state which have a better gender ratio, it is very important that we make each and every individual understand about certain stereotypes that they are subconsciously following, a certain attitude that they are following. Then working on the attitude and the stereotype, we also have to tap down certain notions which can be done through educational institute, or if not educational institute, it can also be done through certain workshops, certain awareness campaign, maybe certain kind of advocacy drive, which will help individual understand that yes, there is a teeny tiny bit of sexism, especially benevolent sexism, which is present, and that can lead to a number of mental health issue, if not for themselves, but people around them. Because as our study also pointed out, that psychologically it does affect individual, especially women, for a longer period of time. This is something that we want to project, and we expect that through this while we publish or get this published, we'll be working on certain policy, and we would have a assessment skill, especially for India, being worked upon through our research paper. So I thank the hosts to allow us present this paper. And I also thank my colleague Tanni, who has been consistently working with me. So we'll be open for questions and we'll be happy to answer that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Really fascinating work. We're going to save questions for the end if people have any, and then transition to our next paper. Marc, whenever you are ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you all. I will try to share my window. I hope you can see the slide. Yeah.
Yep, you're good.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Andy. Good afternoon, everyone. Grateful to be here. My name is Marc Salat. I'm lecturer on criminal law from the University of Lleida from Spain, and I will try to explain quantitative research about trafficking human beings I've undertook with my colleagues that talked during this morning. Well, this is a project that it was formed by the Spanish government, and it's a complex research about trafficking human beings. And I will try to explain a part of that project that it's about a judicial perspective. It's about judicial cases. Well, most of the trafficking human being studies that have been conducted so far are focused on a theoretical analysis of trafficking. Also, in the cases that those are empirical, they consist in a qualitative analysis. However, there are few studies related with a quantitative analysis of trafficking human beings known by the criminal justice systems. Abroad, there are some, basically those that you can see in the, sorry, wait a moment, because, sorry, I had a problem. As I was explaining to you, abroad there are some studies, basically those that you can see in the slide. However, in Spain, all the studies that exist are these three. Taking into account the studies that have been carried out so far, I undertook this quantitative research with four objectives. Firstly, to know the profiles of the offenders and victims. Secondly, to know the purpose of the trafficking cases. Also, to know the relationship of trafficking with the exploitation. And finally, to know the percentage of convictions. So, in order to do that, I analyzed all the judgments handed down by the Spanish country criminal courts on crimes related to human trafficking, since this crime has been passed in the Spanish Penal Code, that date from January 2011 to December 2019. As for the results, as I mentioned before, the first aim of the research was to know the profile of the offenders and victims of human trafficking cases handed down by the Spanish criminal courts. The defendants are generally both men and women in the 63% of the cases, and most of them from foreign countries. The victims, however, were exclusively women in the 90% of the trafficking human being judicial cases, and in relation with their nationality, they were mainly foreigners, as you can see in almost all of the cases. When the relationship between the nationalities of the offenders and victims is analyzed or is compared, we observe that there is a direct relation between both nationalities. So, as you can see here in this graph, when the offenders are from Africa, then the victims are from Africa as well. Then, when the offenders are from East of Europe, then the victims are from East of Europe. When the offenders are from South America, then the victims most of the victims are from South America. Then, when offenders are from Asia, then the victims are from Asia as well. When they are from Portugal, mostly are they from Portugal, and only when defendants are Spanish, they're Spanish and others, is when the victims are from different countries because they are exclusively not from Spain, but from other countries. In these cases, basically they are from South American countries, as you can see here. Yeah, Spain, offenders, Spain and other countries, and then victims from South America. Moving on to the typology of human trafficking cases that known the Spanish criminal courts, the vast majority of cases were for sexual exploitation, as you can see here. Only 10% of the cases were for labor exploitation. Other forms of exploitation like begging, commit crimes, or for marriages were residual, being only 5% of the total cases. If the relation between purpose of trafficking and nationality of the victims are analyzed, victims from East of Europe, so there, East of Europe, are the only ones that have been exploited for begging, for committing crimes, or forced marriages. The other kind, or the other victims from different kind of nationalities, so like Africa, South America, Asia, Portugal, or different nationalities, basically they are exploited only for sexual purposes or labor purposes. Well, going on with the analysis of the type of cases that know the Spanish courts, the main means for committing human trafficking is the deception. So this one in 67% of the cases, followed by the abuse of a vulnerable situation of the victim in 7.7% of the cases. Actually, the use of violence or intimidation has only been used where the victims were from East of Europe, as you can see in this graph. Another interesting finding is about the fact that in 97% of the human trafficking cases known by Spanish criminal courts were identified late. I mean, when some form of exploitation has been taking place. Concluding with the results, we found that there are statistically significant differences between cases of trafficking for sexual and labor exploitation and the probability of conviction. So as you can see in this table, when the purpose of trafficking is sexual exploitation, the percentage of conviction is much higher, also much higher than when the purpose of trafficking is labor exploitation. Well, the findings reveal that there is a high number of women involved as perpetrators in trafficking cases, as it has been confirmed in other papers published in or with data about other countries. If we take into account the percentage of female victims, it has found that in cases of trafficking for labor exploitation, they are higher than those shown in studies carried out in Portugal, United States, Italy, or also in international studies. Also, the relation between offender and victim's nationality confirmed what was found in previous research. So most victims were recruited by someone of their own nationality. However, the presence of a high number of Spanish defendants in cases where the victims are from Latin American countries could be explained by the fact that they share they share the same mother tongue. If we compare the results of this research with international data, we can conclude that the Spanish criminal justice system is too focused on cases of trafficking for sexual exploitation. Moreover, the fact that all victims of trafficking for other than sexual or labor exploitation are from Eastern Europe suggests that there is some kind of bias towards this group. In fact, previous investigations has shown that in Spain, there are cases of trafficking for criminal exploitation or for forced marriages, as it has been explained in a previous panel, and these victims are not only from countries around East of Europe. Also, the use of violence or intimidation against victims from Eastern Europe countries could be explained by the fact that they can move freely around European countries. Furthermore, the fact that the victim has actually been exploited in 97% of trafficking cases known by the Spanish criminal courts should make us think about the need to take more effective actions against trafficking cases. Something similar happens with the number of convictions, which is low when it's compared with judicial data from other countries. In conclusion, Spanish courts have mainly focused on cases of human trafficking for sexual exploitation and where the victim is a foreigner, mainly from two countries, Romania and Nigeria. Also, only cases where the victim is already being exploited come to Spanish courts. So more efforts need to be put towards the detection of a wider spectrum of trafficking scenarios. And above all, this detection needs to take place at an earlier stage, so before the exploitation of the victim actually takes place. So that's all. Thank you for your attention. Feel free to ask anything that you don't need or email me. So thanks.
Thank you. So we have some time now for any questions anybody has for either of our papers. I do have one while we wait to see if anything comes in for Tanni and Vipin. I was wondering if at any point in your work you've seen any kind of association between benevolent sexism and mental health outcomes, because it reminds me of like the idea in the US at least of like being a model minority, right? And people who experience that specific type of racism have like an increased risk of like depressive symptoms and like other negative mental health outcomes associated with this like pressure to succeed. I'm curious if there's something similar with women experiencing benevolent sexism.
Yeah, through our study, we have noticed that in the longer term, like if you have been facing benevolent sexism and you are not aware of it, you are more prone to being more depressive and you are more likely to be diagnosed more with anxiety disorders. And it also makes you feel very powerlessness. It takes away your, like you internalize the sexism that you have been facing. So it takes away your competency. You start to question yourself. We have also noticed that young women in their in trying to in their career decisions or any decision making, they're not being able to decide for themselves. And we have seen a lot in Indian women. I cannot be able to say if it happens mostly in rural or urban Indian women, but in our case, we have seen that we start to question ourselves and we are not given more challenging tasks at workplaces. So that really hampers in our ability to go higher up in the ladder in our corporate or any sector of work.
Thank you. That's so interesting. Do we have any other questions for any of our presenters? Okay, so seeing none, I'm going to let everybody go. Thank you to our presenters for coming out today. I apologize if there is a really terrible time zone difference for you. Rest assured that we at CrimCon are working on that and are thinking about doing some geography specific conferences in the future for all of our friends and colleagues throughout Europe and Asia and Oceania. My sincerest apologies for the time zone issue. Thank you again for everybody for presenting your work. It's fascinating stuff. And thank you everybody for coming out today. I really appreciate your time. And that concludes this stream for CrimCon today. I hope people were able to check out other panels throughout the day, and we will be back tomorrow for another day of fantastic research. Thanks again, everybody, for coming out.
Thank you.
Thank you for having
Enjoy
us.
the rest of your day, night. Get some rest.
Yes.
Yeah, bye.
Bye.
Bye.